I'm assuming everybody can hear me, right? Okay, thank you. Well, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity that Seafair and USDA has given us in presenting some of this stuff. Wyoming has a 500,000 people in it, and so a lot of times we call ourselves as a small community with long sidewalks, and so and it's obviously a heavy energy producing state, so we've benefited a lot from the fossil fuel economy. If you kind of look here at some of this from the Energy Information Agency, worldwide production, crude oil and natural gas production has traditionally gone up. Coal has, and in particular, what you've got here is this last 10 years going up quite a bit. Okay, now think about this in terms of the Clean Power Plan coming up, because this is what I'm going to talk about a bit. In the U.S. primary energy consumption, okay, petroleum has gone up, but coal has also gone up, and natural gas. This primarily is for mostly for transportation based development, but this right here is all electricity, and of course that's in Wyoming. That's really what we're more interested in or more concerned about. Okay, so what I want to talk about is making a transition to renewables and the challenges and opportunities that one might think about from a local development. We've heard from Rick as well as Tim about some of the sort of the unmet promises of renewables and as well as low carbon sources like natural gas and things like that. So, and we see the same thing in Wyoming. So moving from a fossil fuel based economy to a renewable energy economy it means that we're moving from a more sort of compressed perspective in our energy value to a much less compressed and much more distributed energy value. Oil, coal, and actually methane, even relative to renewables, is more easily transported and stored and efficient at releasing energy in modern engines as well as for electricity. A coal mine or oil field yields about 5 times the power per square meter than a solar facility, okay, and 10 to 100 times than a wind farm, and so it's a big change to transition to renewables. Continuity of supply of both these are actually some of the things I'll talk about here, so what policy options will allow us to overcome this technological inertia and the quality shortcomings of renewables. What I want to focus on are sort of the opportunities and complications involving renewables, and I personally have no problems with renewables, and obviously there's a lot of people in my state that have a problem with renewables, but we need to think about some of these opportunities and complications and how we actually do this for communities, and we need to think about managing costs of environmental externalities, both from the renewables, but also from the legacy issues left over, and then I'll finish up some policy evaluations. I put this in here because I want it's extremely important that you can't think about renewables without thinking about, so you have renewable wind power there, but you can think in terms of solar too. You can't think about those without thinking about the physics of the transmission lines, the physics that changes everything, and that changes how markets a lot of times work. So wind power potentially in the United States, and in particular in Wyoming, I just put this up as the National Renewable Energy Lab, suggests that wind potentially in the Midwest, especially in Wyoming, could be quite considerable. That green or the purple and blue that you see there suggests that it's very possible. In particular, in Wyoming, there's actually some blue here, which is very high value, where capacity factors are probably about 50 to 60%. As a matter of fact, the wind's so strong there, they have to turn the turbines off periodically. It gets too high. After about 55 mile hours per hour, wind speeds, you're running into some potential of having having the wind turbines being blown over. Well, what are some of these opportunities and complications involving renewables? Well, here's one possibility. You've got transmission lines coming in here, here, and here. Okay, but the problem is we've got sage grouse sitting in these sage grouse. These green areas are sage grouse core areas, and so adding transmission capacity in those areas could be a real problem, and it has been a real problem. You can't really use wind. Wind's great if you can get the power to where you're actually living or where people are actually using it. But if the transmission lines are congested, then what you're happening is what happens is the price of wind power goes down, and so it's less of an issue, or less of a good investment for the companies that need to make it. So where does this in terms of potential conflicts? All these red and pink areas are areas where, in the case of the sage grouse, it becomes a problem trying to put a transmission line through, or as well as a wind problem itself.
What's sage grouse?
Sage grouse is a bird that was listed. It's been considered listed in the on endangered species. Okay, and fortunately, it was not considered listed in endangered, or at least it's been postponed, that decision. But it's still, we don't know. And so, what this suggests, if you kind of remember where those transmission lines are, a lot of those transmission lines and a lot of the development of wind power is are in those areas. And so, from an environmental side of things, it could be a real problem. Well, let's talk a little bit about solar, especially rooftop solar. California ISO, an independent system operator, has been dealing with this issue where you've got for a given time frame, you've got a growth in production. So if you've got sunlight, you're producing electricity, right? When a cloud goes over it, you're not producing electricity, you're producing less. Okay, so all of a sudden you got this an increase when it starts getting light out. Then it starts going back down because you're shifting into other sources. Okay, and then you got mid-afternoon an increase in electricity, solar electricity, base electricity there. So what happens is that the independent system operator has to flip off, or ask companies to flip on and off sources of electricity and almost immediately, because you can end up overloading the transmission grid if you're not careful, or not having enough electricity at one time. And so this complicates this issue in a major way, as in terms of trying to figure out how to deal with rooftop solar, the immense growth in rooftop solar. As a matter of fact, because you have to get paid, okay, this is the same thing with wind, okay, you have to get paid whether or not you're going to be producing wind or not, or producing rooftop solar or solar energy. You can actually get negative prices in the Pacific Northwest. This has actually occurred, where you're in a sense paying them not to produce, okay, because they have to recoup their expenses, and this has been an increasing issue. It just complicates the wind issue considerably. The opportunities, though, are an interesting opportunity, and this is a project we're working on in Wyoming. So solar and wind versus Wyoming wind and California solar. Okay, if I'm producing wind electricity at the same time I'm producing solar, okay, which is what happens in California. Okay, there's a high correlation. Okay, so but if the wind is coming when California isn't producing a lot of wind-based solar or wind-based electricity or solar-based electricity, but Wyoming is, or eastern Colorado is, then you can actually complement development of wind and solar in a broader grid, a broader region by relying on Wyoming and Colorado on one side, when California isn't producing, and vice versa. But to do that, you need the transmission systems. This is another diversity. I won't spend any time on this, but it's the same way. You've got this notion that when wind or solar is producing, then you've got other issues going on that you can actually complement each other. So transitioning away from fossil fuels, okay, that's the second problem. Okay, now this is the different types of sources of revenues that come from coal and natural gas and oil to Wyoming. Severance taxes, federal mineral royalties, 50% of that comes back to the state, and then coal lease bonus, which I won't spend any time on. But what I just want to show you this is, where does this money get wired into? Well, it goes to the water funds, highway fund, cities and towns, counties, general fund, of course, to the state, the cities, the schools, capital construction, the University of Wyoming is down here someplace. There I am. And so when you shift from fossil to renewable, it becomes a real challenge fiscally and financially, both at the local and at the state level. The Clean Power Plan situation kind of shows this. So you got these huge, potentially negative employment changes with a little bit of an improvement in natural gas. But what's more important is the loss of these revenue sources for the cities, towns, and the state itself. Quite a bit, and that's kind of what we're worried about right now, trying to figure out how to do that. It doesn't stop there in terms of the legacy issue of trying to move from that. You've got managing environmental effects and surface effects. Transitioning to other sources does not mean that cleanup is not needed. Legacy you still need that. You need to clean those up. Invasive species here. You've got antelope there that people want to see. Subsurface levels. I won't go into detail on Pavilion, Wyoming, but if you're in an urban area or a suburban area, or you're a rural area and you're in an arid area and you lose the quality of the water goes away, well, you've lost an immense amount of the value of your land as a result of the fact of hydraulic fracturing. The state is implicit. For the state, it's kind of an implicit land condemnation. Okay. There's also a spatial issue. Okay, just about there. And you've got coal reinjection of brine 15 miles away ended up coming into this rancher's land 15 miles away when they were forcibly reinjecting the brine into it. And so that geography or that geology complicates things. And there's other issues that still exist. Invasive and noxious weeds, as I mentioned, contaminated soils, PCBs, open holes, compacted soils, and things like that you have to deal with. Cleanup costs are tenuous because the bust industries are not making as a higher profit. Residents can encounter water quality and wildlife issues after hydraulic fracturing. And it's important to establish monitoring systems to assess market value of a development with and without water contamination, ownership responses, and cost of underinvestment and improvements as a result of that. When that happens, the final issues that I would suggest that we need to think about is, and this is kind of what both Rick and Tim have already said, is that you need more of a collaborative engagement working with the industry, and the industry's willing to do that. You need joint monitoring and sharing of monitoring expenses, and you need to start building inventories on resource bases that are important to the community. And when you move that, just because you move to renewables doesn't mean you need this stuff. Doesn't mean it doesn't. Those problems go away. They're still there, and in fact, it's actually even harder to deal with because you don't have that. It's great to have oil and gas or coal making lots of money, because then they're more likely going to spend some of that money to maintain cleanup. But if they're not making any money, they're not going to do that.